Welcome back. We're talking about Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's visit to Europe and the ties between China and the European Union. Let's get right back to our panel. Let's go back to Cui Hongjian in Berlin. And Cui Hongjian, we were talking a moment ago about China's Belt and Road Initiative. And Peter Ho was telling us that while this is a great initiative, there are concerns in Europe about Chinese investment. Are there concerns, and what would those concerns be?
Yes, as we know, I think that so far, I think from a European side, I think this concern, firstly, I think we can find out some active side, which means that European countries, they pay a lot of attention on the Chinese initiative. And also, I think they started to realize maybe the potential benefits for cooperating with China. But of course, I think now, it's also a time for European countries. I think they need to take some more time to be familiar with this, change of situation. Because as we know, in the past, especially after Chinese opening up and reform policy, most of the time in the past, that it's China to receive the investment from Europe, from other advanced economies. I think now it's just a starting point for Europe and for some other, developed economies. They get some more investment from China. So I think it's a, issue of psychology at the first. And also second, I think that still, as we know, we do have some differences in political system, economic structure, and so on. So I think that also it will give some more time for European countries to accept this Chinese approach in investment. But of course, I think the most important thing for China and Europe to have some more cooperation on investment is we need to get some more, collaboration. We need to have some more communication, and we also have some, the synergy in rules. As we know, China is one of the countries in the world to obey to the rule-based trade and investment. But of course, we do have maybe some different approaches. But I think now it's time for us to have some more discussion, to have some more, mutual trust. I think that's very important, especially for this investment issue.
All right, Nicolas, I'm going to get back to something you were talking about a moment ago, and that is intellectual property rights. It's been a concern in Europe as well as in the United States. Premier Li reiterated a commitment in Brussels to protect the intellectual property of companies that are investing in China, that are doing business in China. Will that placate the Europeans, do you think? Do you think that will encourage more investment by Europeans into China?
I think things are making progress with intellectual property rights protection in China. The question is the pace, so the direction of travel is stronger protection of intellectual property rights, frankly, because Chinese companies need that. Because Chinese companies are moving up the value chain, and more they have intellectual property of their own that they want protected. So the interests are nicely aligned here between China and Europe. But we're not yet there. There are still disturbing stories, not necessarily from central government policy, but from local government policy, for example, that would encourage local champions to, for lack of a better word, steal intellectual property. There has been a lot of cyber espionage in the past. This seems to be getting better now, but there are still some concerns. So I think, things are moving in a good direction, but there's still a lot of scope for discussion. I want to say something perhaps on the previous topic, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. Here there's a big difference between Europe and the US, and I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that the US has been #1 in the world for a long period of time, and the rise of China is displacing a number of assumptions about the world in the US, which is a complicated transition, right? In Europe, it's more simple. Europe has accepted US leadership. Europe continues to accept US leadership, but they also accept the fact that China is getting bigger and bigger, is getting more and more central in the world system. And therefore, the Belt and Road project in Europe, I think broadly speaking is welcomed. I mean, infrastructure to connect Europe and China, who can be against that? So it's more about the modalities, the access of companies to public contracts, things like that, competitive neutrality again, an open environment for public procurement, things like that. But the principle of the Belt and Road Initiative as such is not something that is problematic in Europe in the way it is with some stakeholders in the US.
Yeah, and I don't think it is in the United States either. I mean, there is some skepticism, but it hasn't been rejected outright, has it?
I think it depends a bit who you ask.
There is a bit of a debate going on here. There are American companies which would like to be involved in that.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Peter, this summit comes at a rough time for China, which is involved in this bruising trade battle with the United States right now. It also comes at a time when we're hearing these increasing calls for reform of the World Trade Organization, the WTO. So how do you see Europe and China work now at a summit of this kind to perhaps calm those turbulent waters?
In terms of the reform of the WTO, this is a topic that has been recently taken up by China as an important issue for discussion with the European Union. And in that sense, it's very important to see how the two can now cooperate in trying to effect some kind of institutional change within the WTO. And that is, of course, very important when you look at the current political and economic climate. What is interesting here also to note is, of course, that, as you already mentioned, the EU and China are very important trading partners. If we look at the figures, I mean, China is investing 9 times more in the EU than in the United States.
Right.
At present, China is exporting 375 billion euro. That was last year, and the European Union was exporting 198 billion to China, which actually amounts to 1.5 billion euros per day. So that gives you sort of a sense of the enormous economic intertwinement,
right,
as well as the scale of the trade between China and the European Union. And these are the facts that will also be the parameters for the negotiations in trying to reform the WTO. And in this sense, China and the European Union are, of course, quite aligned in their interests.
Okay, Klaus, how much of a balancing act is this for the European Union? On the one hand, trying to build its ties with China, and on the other hand, maintaining the relationship that it's traditionally held with the United States?
Yeah, it is indeed a balancing act, and I think the Europeans are not in a very good position. Obviously, they very much appreciate their links, their economic links, but also their cultural and political links with China. They've done so for many, many years now, quite successfully. But on the other hand, they are, of course, very loyal allies to the United States. The Trump administration has, of course, very much complicated the picture, but the essentials of the transatlantic relationships are still there, even despite Trump. And at the working level below Trump, even at cabinet level or at a working level in the State Department, for example, transatlantic relations are quite alive and kicking and very much flourishing. And the Europeans appreciate American democracy, American values, and also we shouldn't overlook that still the American nuclear security umbrella, which is totally essential for Europe and which they really can't provide themselves. So there are a lot of intimate links between Europe and the United States, but on the other hand, Europe also would like to have very good relations with China, as they have at the moment. But when both sides enter into something like a trade war and also increasingly a geopolitical conflict, where there are serious geostrategic differences, that puts Europe in a very difficult position. And they don't really want to side with either side. it is a real and true balancing act. But I think one can say that the Europeans have no desire to mediate between the United States and China.
Right.
They're in no position to do so, and I think they also don't have the ambition. Talking to both sides, having a word, a whisper into their respective ears, that's a different matter to actually embarking on a formal process of mediation.
Okay.
And if I just can say a word about the Belt and Road Initiative.
Very quickly,
time. I think what was said was perfectly, was right. Many companies would like to get involved, but governments are very concerned about the lack of transparency, lack of debt sustainability, which is often the case. And I think if these issues get approached and addressed, then I think we can make some really real progress.
Okay.
And the European connectivity strategy is not a rival to Belt and Road.
Okay.
It complements it. It's a model how Belt and Road should perhaps function.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's all we have time for. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.